Time for another TV list. But instead of a certain trend in TV, what I'm doing this time is a list of my favourite episodes from one particular show. Which one? How about one of the most popular shows of all time? Star Trek was epic, it was thought-provoking, it had extremely relevant messages, it had unforgettable characters, and it changed the course of science fiction forever. There are now 11 different Star Trek shows, 8 live action and 3 animated. But for this list, we're only going to be focusing on the original series. It's the only one I've seen all the way through, after all. I've seen a few episodes of The Next Generation and a couple from Voyager, and they've really got me hyped to see the rest, but so far, the original series is the only one I've seen in its entirety. I originally compiled this list back when I considered it my favourite show of all time, but after running through it a second time, I have to say I don't think it's aged well. The ingenious writing still holds up for the most part, but the show's aesthetic doesn't, and sadly that's pretty hard to overlook. I guess more modern shows have spoilt me with their higher production values and continuous storylines. That, and you have to put up with a lot of awkward 1960s sensibilities, especially the rampant sexism that just would not fly today. Because of this, I actually find the show very hard to watch. However, every once in a while there would come an episode that was good enough to break through my discomfort. So these are the episodes that stick in my head the most, the ones that make it all worthwhile. Also, because TV episodes are much shorter than movies, I figure it's only fair that this is another case where I shouldn't need to iron out the captions to 100 words. So here we go. This is my top 10 favourite Star Trek The Original Series episodes. Number 10, Court Martial. This was the first episode I ever saw, and it really set the standard for the rest of the series. It's about Captain Kirk being placed on trial for his apparent misconduct that led to the death of a crewman. It features an ingenious method in which the characters overcome the odds, and it's not so complex that it's impossible to follow and understand. And that, to me, is Star Trek in a nutshell. Number 9, The Mark of Gideon. While beaming down to the surface of the overpopulated planet Gideon, Kirk ends up in an alternate version of the Enterprise and finds himself completely alone. This episode's message about overpopulation is pretty obvious, but it's still relevant, and the Gideon citizens' plan to combat it, while questionable, is still pretty clever. Sometimes it's all about giving the antagonists a good reason for their actions. Number 8, The Enemy Within. While beaming up, the transporter accidentally splits Kirk into 2 beings, one good, weak and indecisive, and one evil, aggressive and domineering. The whole idea of this episode is that no one can make any logical decision without their more ruthless side. Really gets you thinking, doesn't it? Number 7, appropriately enough, the Galileo Seven. Spock and a scientific party are stranded on Taurus 2 and fighting for their lives, and their shuttlecraft hasn't enough fuel to regain orbit carrying all 7 of them. The bulk of this episode is seeing Spock taking command and deciding logically who's expendable, much to the disdain of his companions. It's some pretty heavy shit. Number 6, Whom Gods Destroy. Kirk and Spock are imprisoned in a mental health facility that's been taken over by an insane former starship captain who believes he's destined to control the universe. The whole reason this makes my top 10 is because of the sheer threat factor of the villain. He just can't be reasoned with, and the fact that he can shapeshift certainly doesn't help either. He really is one of the toughest opponents ever on the show. Number 5, Spectre of the Gun. After ignoring a warning from the Melkoshian people, the landing party is thrown into a simulation of Tombstone on the day of the gunfight at the OK Corral, with them in the role of the ill-fated Clantons. What I love about this episode in particular is how it defies the idea that the characters have to make stupid decisions just so the story can progress. They try everything to escape their fate, leaving town, rallying the townspeople, even building an anachronistic weapon to give them an advantage, but nothing works. Number 4, the Tholian Web. Kirk is left stranded in another dimension, and a race against time is on to bring him back before the Enterprise is crippled by an energy-draining web being spun by Tholian ships. This episode is particularly interesting in how the rest of the crew is left to manage in Kirk's absence, and it's conclusive proof that the characters are what holds the show together, because you really do feel a sense of emptiness, as though Kirk really is dead. Number 3, Metamorphosis. Kirk and company's shuttlecraft crashes on a rocky planet where they find another castaway and an alien entity that he calls the Companion, who's later revealed to be in love with him. This one really gets you thinking about what true love really is, and it's a surprisingly heartwarming episode, especially the poetic justice in the scene where one life ends and another begins. In fact, it actually manages to get me a little teary-eyed. And that's saying a lot, because I usually find this show's attempts to be romantic unbearable. Number 2, The Trouble with Tribbles. I know, everyone saw this one coming from a mile away, but how could this one not be up there? It's just so hilarious that something so small, adorable, and apparently harmless could become such a nuisance and a danger to a diplomatic arrangement. And to top it all off, there are Klingons involved. What more could you ask for? This is probably the best loved episode of all, and for good reason, so it's almost always guaranteed to be up there on anyone's top 10 list. But this is my own list, so I need to reserve the top spot. Here it is. Number 1, The Cage. Yes, that's right, the originally unseen pilot episode that was then edited into the two-parter The Menagerie. It involves Captain Pike being held captive by a group of telepathic aliens. The aliens' flawless power of illusion, as well as their ability to read your thoughts, makes them virtually impossible to beat, so it's definitely the toughest battle in the show's history. It's also a really nice brain teaser in that you never know what's real and what's just an illusion. It's hard to explain exactly, but it just seems like the smartest episode to me. It was the perfect way to kickstart the series, and that's what makes it my favourite episode of them all. Runners up, Balance of Terror involves a cat-and-mouse game between the Enterprise and a rogue Romulan bird of prey. The City on the Edge of Forever involves a crazed McCoy causing irreparable damage with a time portal. Operation Annihilate involves trying to find a cure for an infection brought on by giant amoeba-like creatures. Shore Leave is memorable for the initially bizarre sights that soon bring on very real danger. Space Seed features the famous appearance of Khan as he tries to take over the Enterprise. And This Side of Paradise involves flowers whose spores induce pure bliss at the cost of discipline. And there you have it. Maybe sometime in the future I'll compile some more top 10 favourite episodes lists of my actual favourite shows.